So it was very interesting to hear Jim, our last speaker, talk about tactical combat casualty care. You know, as late as it is extremely critical to get this down to the service member level. I'm glad that that's actually occurring. I think when you see some of the slides and some of the comments I'm going to make, you may end up determining that it's even more critical than we had, some of us may currently envision. So as Dr. Champion indicated, my name is Mike Galarneau. For those of you that may not know me, I'm the Director of Operational Readiness and Health at the Naval Health Research Center. Part of that directorate is the Department of Medical Modeling and Simulation for the Navy. I have been affiliated with that department for the last 28 years, and in my discussions with you today, I'm going to be wearing that hat. The type of medical modeling and simulation that I'll be talking to you today is not of the type that you're probably going to be hearing about later on today and tomorrow. I'm not going to be talking about developing human surrogates for training or surgical simulators or haptics for those types of simulations. I'm going to be talking about the development of decision support tools for all of the services. So while the Navy pays my check, the Naval Health Research Center is the DoD designated, Health Affairs designated DoD Center for Deployment Health Research. So everything I'm talking about involves all of the services and is extremely joint. All right, so that kind of gets us to some of the gaps that I think I was asked to talk about with you folks here. So all this planning, which is really basically how everything gets to where it's supposed to be in the right order at the right time, at the top of that particular pipeline, all this medical planning is fundamentally based on the patient, and that patient is characterized on the nature of their injuries and illnesses. So today, so we've captured this data all the way back to the beginning of World War II. But as we all know, it's only been the last 15 years where at least the clinical data has really become very, very useful. It's been highly characterized. And I'd like to give a shout out to the Department of Defense Trauma Registry for being very gracious enough to be able to provide the trauma part of that data into our models. But unfortunately, because that's mostly ground combat, and it is only over the last 15 years, it has basically come to my attention through the COCOMs and joint staff that we may have some gaps with regard to the evolution of the national defense strategy when it comes to near-peer adversaries. And that some potential injury types, they're not missing now, but may be missing or undercharacterized in the future. And I want to talk to you about these injury and treatment gaps, because I think this is the type of meeting of highly educated and experienced providers, scientists, and allied support services that can come together and help us fill this gap. Because if we don't fill this gap, the stuff that we're going to need in theater when these folks start coming through, and there's going to be potentially a lot of them, may not be necessarily a good thing in the early parts of an operation. So what are we doing now, what is being done? All right, so this is the issue. So these are very powerful weapons from near-peer adversaries they're not made in the kitchen with materials obtained from the black market. These are highly sophisticated weapons. This is World War II. This is what happened. So now we're expecting ballistic weapons, and while I've got sea-based operations here, this applies to ground-based. But right now, what has really got our leaders concerned is this right now, because this is a little bit different than ground-based. I mean, these are all in the water, and that water is generally not warm. These ships are in the middle of nowhere, and they're little mini cities with hundreds and sometimes thousands of individuals. We've got 8 expeditionary strike groups, and each of them have these big LDECs that are full of Marines, thousands of Marines, all ready there to go wherever they need to go when they're called. And then you add to that a ship's crew, another 1,500 of those that need to operate these giant ships. When something like that gets hit, with weapons like that, quite frankly, we're not really sure what happens. So what are we doing to kind of mitigate that? Well, every 2 years, there's what's called RIMPAC 2020, RIMPAC exercises. I'm sure many of you have heard of those. They're the world's largest wargaming scenario. It's global. That's
the start of the war game.
Perfect timing. These are led by the United States, and yeah, I think somebody probably should. Led by the United States and all of our allies. They get together and they have these war games that go on for weeks. Actually, I think they go on for more than a month. Part of the war games is to go ahead and sink a ship. So we asked the Army in 2018, the Navy in 2018, because there's no data to really know what happens when a big weapon hits a ship. We've got very, very little data to go on. We've got a couple of Iranian attacks, sophisticated missiles have hit our ships. One of them didn't go off, and it still caused a number of deaths. We got the coal. Nobody really thinks that's an anomaly. Most folks think that the coal is an anomaly, and we've got the Falklands data in our tools. But we still have huge gaps on what's happening inside of those ships and who's getting injured, how many, and what are they going to present with. So the Navy said yeah, and so a consortium of the Office of Naval Research, Naval Systems Command, which is the agency that assesses vulnerability on our ships. They just usually use systems and structural issues that they're concerned now, where they're beginning to get into human injury and treatment effects on their ships. And the Naval Health Research Center got together and instrumented the ship that was going to get sunk. We need to find out. So here's the gaps. We need to find out, what the blast overpressure signatures look. We need to know how that blast propagates through multiple complex compartments. What's the accelerative loading in these compartments? What's the thermal signatures? What about ship spalling? There's a lot of loose material in all of these compartments. People live in these spaces. We've got an issue with prolonged field care and these kinds of distributed ops. A ship like this gets hit, it could be a couple days before another ship goes back and begins to do a rescue mission, because the Navy has indicated to us in no uncertain terms, if we are in a combat situation, they're not going to turn around, send a ship back from the strike group to address those casualties, which is another issue I'm going to bring up to you shortly. And then I don't know if many of you know it or not, but on most ships in the Navy fleet, there is only one senior provider, and of course that provider is never going to get hurt, right? All right, so this is what we did. In the top left, you can see some blast sensor, thermal sensors. We put high-speed cameras in various compartments. In the bottom left, this is a proof of concept. We had some very simple human surrogates. And in the right, you see a raft right there that was tethered to the back of the ex-USNS McCluskey. That was a ship that was going to got shot. All the data was wired to go to that raft, and when the missile hit that ship, that raft was detached and floated away. That was and that was successful. That was our biggest complication. This is the experimental design. You see those red cubes there. Those are the 3 decks that we had instrumented. You can see where the FAA-18 pilot was supposed to have that missile hit. The missile was a SLAM-ER. It's an infrared missile. I'm just going to call it a SLAM-ER. If you look at a ship there, you might be able to see a red mark on the side. That's not a red cross. It's actually a red X for the FA-18 pilot to aim here. Furthermore, if you look below that, you'll see what looks like a cannon aimed out of a porthole in the side of the ship. In reality, that's an industrial heater that was supposed to be on for 3 days to heat the ship's skin up right behind that X to make sure that missile hit that spot. Unfortunately, we as Americans are just like insanely obsessed about safety. Everything is be safe, I think it's insurance related and whatnot. So sure enough, that particular heater, every time it hit a certain temperature, it automatically shut off. So we didn't get the heat signature we wanted. But we did get data. We got some. It'll only be able to convert to minor injury data, but that's okay because our tools don't do just trauma. They do every injury and illness that is likely to occur in a scenario. So we'll translate those signatures once we figure out how to do that. But what I'd like to do is just take maybe a cognitive break here for just a second and kind of show you what it looked like when the missile hit. Remember, it's not going to be exciting as it missed, but this is where this is kind of what it looked like. And of course, it's not going to go off. Oh, I'm sorry. It actually would have been a nice break if the video had played. It shows the what happened in those compartments. So there was an event. The missile, was big enough to cause some substantial damage. It turned out the U.S. wasn't really good that day. It turned out the Singaporeans, using our planes and missiles, were the ones that ended up sinking it. Okay, so here's the second issue that I think has got a lot, that I know has a lot of people very, very worried. And that's that, okay, the naval strike groups are going to be in contested waters and they are going to be vulnerable to these advanced munitions. And the Navy has begun to enter a paradigm shift where they are acknowledging they are likely to have ships that are no longer capable of doing the mission because they've been hit, and ships that are even that are even going to be sunk. That's going to result in service members in the water, potentially numbering in the hundreds, with and without injury, which can be further complicated by adverse environmental conditions. Water temperature, wind speeds. Some of the folks will be in life rafts, some will not. Some will have life preservers, some will not. As I mentioned, the Navy's not going to send a ship back to rescue. That means, the size of the Pacific, those folks are going to be in the water. It's planned, or expected to be a very, very long time before they're even rescued. So the gap that I would like to present to this committee right now, this treatment gap, is basically of this structure. We would anticipate that all of those in the water are going to be delayed and prolonged field care. As I said, possibly days. And even once they do have a rescue operation underway. They've got the folks within sight. It may take days to get hundreds of people out of the water. All are going to present with, I think it's fair to say, all are going to present with environmental hypothermia. The ship that finally arrives, or whatever does finally arrive, may not have surgical capability. We know when a ship gets hit, there's a lot of things that go boom on it, not to mention that these ballistic missiles also are incendiary. Traditionally, we're going to have a lot of burns. That's the number one fear of all sailors historically. So we may have a lot of people with severe burns compounded by environmental hypothermia. We're going to have hypovolemic hypothermia compounded by environmental hypothermia. Our providers are going to have to deal with saltwater inhalation and ingestion. That is not a good thing. And so the next two items I'm not going to talk about, but there are some issues that there are some products that ONR is developing right now to be able to do triage from rescuers, to be able to identify who's dead, who's alive, and to get some measures of the survivor's physiological status, particularly their physiological reserve, to help the rescuers identify those who need to be pulled out of the water the soonest. But this is the condition of patients that we really don't have a lot of practice with, and we don't know what they're going to be presenting with, how hypothermic they really are, and what is the clinical care, and what are the medical supplies that's going to be necessary in order to be able to resuscitate these individuals. Okay, so what I would like to finally conclude with is the last gap that has been on people's minds for quite a while, and there is beginning to be money that is being expended on it. However, it's still a big gap, even though there has been some progress made, and that's the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear exposure associated on top of traditional wartime injuries. I don't really like to say traditional. I don't think that's a particularly good word, but basically with expected wartime battlefield kinetic energy. So the combatant commands have been very vocal. They don't really have an ability to be able to do medical planning for these, full medical planning for these events. There are clinical practice guidelines out there for chem-bio rad-nuc exposure, but they don't really go into very much detail about what is going to be the interaction between the kinetic energy and those particular exposures. Patient movement is going to be very complicated in a contaminated environment. So not only are we going to have this issue of two different types of clinical conditions presenting, but that we may have them for a very, very long time. We're also not sure about the psychological effects of continuous patient treatment in a contaminated environment. That's all untested. Early on, there may be unknown and unidentified agents. What are the treatment protocols that are going to be employed in a situation where there may even be multiple exposures, which might complicate the appropriate courses of action. So with the very, very limited data to draw from, both from real-world experiences and the literature, I offer these as challenges for the future for a body such as this to begin to address and inform the community that will need to be addressing it. Okay, so that is essentially the issues that I bring to you today. I hope that they resonate with some of you, and these can begin to be addressed on a wide-scale basis. Thank you very much, and I will be around for the rest of the day if anybody has any questions.